The snow had started before dusk, the kind that didn't announce itself with drama but arrived quietly, steadily, as if it meant to stay. Eli Mercer noticed it only because the world seemed to soften around the edges, the mountains blurring into a pale hush as he rode the last fence line of the day. Winter always came hard up here. That was the price of land that gave you room to breathe. He was turning his horse toward home when he heard the voice, so small it almost vanished into the wind. "Mister, please." Eli reined in sharply. At first he saw nothing but white and pine, then movement near the old logging trail. A boy stood there, no more than 6 or 7, his coat too thin, his boots soaked through. His hands were red with cold, clutching something behind him. Eli swung down from the saddle. "Hey there, you lost." The boy shook his head too fast. "No, we were resting." Eli followed the boy's gaze. A woman lay against a fallen log, snow collecting in her dark hair. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her breath shallow. One leg was twisted at an angle that made Eli's stomach tighten. The boy whispered, voice breaking, "Mama can't walk anymore." Eli didn't think. He never did in moments like this. Thinking came later when it was safe. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around the woman first, tucking it tight. "What's your name, son?" "Jacob." "I'm Eli. You did right calling out." He lifted the woman carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Hunger had a way of stealing mass from people long before it stole hope. The boy reached for his hand. Eli took it. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen fully. Eli kicked the door open, carried the woman inside, and laid her on the narrow bed by the fire. He stoked the flames until warmth pushed back the cold. Jacob hovered near the door, unsure. "You can come closer," Eli said gently. Jacob sat beside his mother, holding her hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. The woman stirred hours later. Her eyes flew open, panic flashing until she saw Jacob's face. "Mama," he whispered, "we're warm." She tried to sit up, failed, and winced. "Where?" "My cabin," Eli said from the stove. "You're safe." She studied him, fear and exhaustion warring in her expression. "We don't have anything to give you." Eli set a mug of broth on the table. "Then it's a good thing I wasn't asking." Her name was Clara. They had been traveling for weeks, she and Jacob, heading nowhere in particular, just away. Away from a mill town that closed, from a landlord who didn't care, from promises that dissolved when spoken aloud. She slipped on ice that afternoon, felt something tear, kept going until her leg refused. "I told him to leave me," she said quietly. "He wouldn't." Jacob shook his head fiercely. "I won't ever." Eli looked away, throat tight. Clara slept for nearly a day. Fever broke sometime before dawn. Eli changed compresses, fed her broth by the spoonful, spoke softly when the pain woke her. Jacob watched everything. After a while he started helping, bringing water, feeding the fire, lining up Eli's boots just so. "You don't have to do that," Eli told him. Jacob shrugged. "I like helping." The storm lasted 3 days. By the 4th, Clara could sit up. By the 6th, she could stand with help. Her leg would heal, Eli said, but not if she rushed it. "And after that?" she asked. Eli didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the snow-covered valley, at the fence lines no one else had wanted to mend, at the silence he'd chosen years ago because it asked nothing of him. "You can stay," he said finally, "until you don't need to." Clara nodded, tears slipping free. "Thank you." Word travels slowly in the mountains, but it always travels. By spring, the town below knew Eli Mercer had a woman and a child living with him. Some nodded approvingly, some whispered, some waited for trouble like it was entertainment. Eli didn't care. Jacob grew stronger, laughed louder, learned to ride before he learned to read. He called Eli sir at first, then Mr. Eli, and finally nothing at all, just ran toward him when he came in from the fields. One night, months later, Clara stood in the doorway watching Eli repair a chair. "You saved us," she said. Eli shook his head. "You knocked, I opened the door." She stepped closer. "You carried us both into your cabin, you didn't know us." "I knew enough," he replied. "You stayed." The truth came later, as truths do. Clara told him about the accident that took Jacob's father, about the factory owner who offered help with strings attached, about how running had seemed like the only honest option left. Eli listened, didn't interrupt, didn't judge. "I don't know what we are," she said at the end. Eli set his tools down. "Then we don't name it yet." Years passed like that, gently, intentionally. Jacob called the cabin home. Clara planted a garden that refused to fail. Eli laughed more than he remembered knowing how to. One winter evening, long after the memory of that first storm had faded into something softer, Jacob sat by the fire and said, very casually, "You're my family." Eli froze. Clara looked at him, searching. He swallowed, "If you'll have me." Jacob grinned. Clara reached for Eli's hand. Outside, snow began to fall again, not fierce this time, not desperate, just enough to remind the land of where they'd started. Somewhere in the mountains, a boy once whispered that his mama couldn't walk anymore. A cowboy listened. And because he did, 3 lives became something sturdier than survival. They became home. Spring came late that year, as if the mountains wanted to be certain the cold had truly loosened its grip before allowing anything new to grow. Eli noticed it first in the mornings. The silence felt different, less sharp. The light crept through the cabin windows with a gentler hand. Snow still lingered in the shadows, but the earth beneath had begun to breathe again. Clara could walk on her own now. Not far, not fast, but she could step outside without leaning on the doorframe, could stand long enough to hang laundry, could kneel beside the garden bed and press seeds into the soil with steady fingers. Each step felt like a quiet victory. Eli never rushed her. He never said how long she could stay or hinted at what came next. He worked the land as he always had, fixing fences, tending cattle, mending what broke. But something had changed in the way he came home. He listened for Jacob's laughter. The boy followed him everywhere now, asked endless questions about the land, the animals, the mountains. "Why do you live so far away from town?" Jacob asked one afternoon as they repaired a gate together. Eli considered it. "Because out here, people don't tell you who to be." Jacob nodded, serious. "I like that." Clara watched them from the porch, her heart tightening in ways she hadn't felt since before loss taught her caution. She saw how Eli never raised his voice, never brushed Jacob aside, never treated him like a burden. The boy wasn't a guest here. He was becoming part of the land itself. And that terrified her, because belonging meant something to lose. The first real test came in early summer. A man from town rode up unannounced, dust on his coat, judgment already settled in his eyes. He looked from Eli to Clara to Jacob, then back again. "Didn't expect to see you playing house," he said. Eli rested his hand on the fence rail, calm, solid. "Then you should have stayed in town." The man scoffed. "People are talking." "They always do. They say the woman showed up with nothing, that she's using you." Clara felt the words like a slap. She opened her mouth, but Eli spoke first. "They can say what they want," he said evenly. "This land doesn't answer to them." The man glanced at Jacob, then back at Eli, and the boy. Eli didn't hesitate. "Is my concern." That was all. The man left shortly after, his curiosity unsatisfied. That night Clara sat awake long after Jacob had fallen asleep. The fire crackled softly. Eli cleaned his tools by lamplight. "You didn't have to say that," she said quietly. Eli looked up. Say what? That were your concern. He set the cloth aside. You are. She swallowed. What if that costs you? Eli leaned back in his chair, studying her the way he always did, carefully, respectfully. Some things are worth the cost. Tears slipped down her face before she could stop them. I've spent so long running, she whispered. I don't know how to stay without being afraid. Eli stood and crossed the room, not touching her, just close enough that she felt his presence. Then stay afraid, he said gently. You don't have to be brave to be welcome here. That was the night Clara finally slept without dreaming of leaving. Summer brought work and warmth and long evenings under open skies. Jacob grew taller, stronger, learned to fish, learned to read with a dog-eared book Eli had kept since boyhood. Clara's laughter came easier now, no longer startled by its own sound. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Jacob sat between them on the porch steps. Can I ask something? He said. Always, Clara replied. He looked at Eli. If we stayed forever, would that be okay? Eli felt his chest tighten. He chose his words carefully. Forever is a long time, son. Jacob nodded. I know, but I like it here. Clara held her breath. Eli rested his hand on the boy's shoulder. So do I. That winter snow returned, but it didn't feel the same. It fell softly, peacefully, as if remembering why it had once tested them so harshly. The cabin held warmth easily now. Laughter filled corners that had once echoed. One night, during the first heavy snowfall, Clara stood at the window watching flakes drift down. This is when you found us, she said. Eli joined her. You found me too. She turned to him, eyes steady. If Jacob grows up here, what would that make us? Eli thought of the night he'd carried them both through the snow, of a boy's whisper, of a woman who refused to leave her child behind, of a door that opened and never truly closed again. It would make us a family, he said simply. Clara nodded. Then I'm done running. Outside, the snow covered the old tracks completely. No sign remained of the night that had brought them together. Only the home that came after. The years didn't arrive all at once. They came the way the mountains taught them to, slowly, deliberately, with space to breathe in between. Jacob turned 8 that spring. Eli carved him a small wooden horse from an old fence post, sanding it smooth until it fit perfectly in the boy's hand. Jacob ran through the fields with it, inventing stories where the horse crossed rivers and outran storms. Clara watched from the porch, one hand resting on her stomach, the other shading her eyes from the sun. She hadn't told Eli yet. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted the moment to be right. This land respected timing, so did Eli. She told him that night after supper, after Jacob had fallen asleep with his boots still on, worn out from the day. I went to town today, Clara said softly. Eli looked up. Everything all right? She nodded, then took his hand and placed it gently over her belly. We won't be just 3 anymore. Eli didn't speak. He simply sat there, frozen, breath shallow, like a man afraid the world might vanish if he moved too fast. Then his eyes filled. He laughed once, broken, disbelieving, and pulled her into his arms with a careful tenderness that said he understood how fragile miracles could be. Are you sure? He whispered. Clara smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. That night, Eli stood outside long after the fire burned low, staring up at the stars. He hadn't planned for this life. He hadn't believed it would ever find him. And yet here it was, quiet, real, asking only that he stay present. Jacob sensed the change before anyone told him. He noticed the way Eli hovered more, the way Clara tired more easily. One afternoon, while helping her water the garden, he looked up and said, Is the baby coming? Clara blinked. How did you? He shrugged. You smile different. When she nodded, Jacob grinned so wide it hurt to look at. I'm gonna teach them everything, he said. so they don't get lost. The town found out eventually. Towns always do. Some people softened, others hardened. A few came by with awkward congratulations. One woman brought a quilt, another brought advice no one asked for. Eli listened politely, said little, kept doing what he'd always done, working the land, protecting his home, choosing his family every day. The baby arrived during a storm, of course. The wind howled like it remembered that first night, but this time the cabin stood ready. The fire burned strong. Eli's hands shook as he held Clara's, whispering encouragement, terror, awe, all tangled together. When the cry finally came, sharp and alive, Eli sank to his knees. A daughter. They named her Grace. Eli held her like she was made of light. Jacob stood beside him, solemn and proud, one hand resting on Eli's arm as if to steady them both. "She's ours," Jacob said quietly. "Yes," Eli replied, "she is." Life after that grew fuller, louder, messier, and sweeter than Eli had ever imagined. Grace learned to walk holding onto fence rails. Jacob learned responsibility the hard way, with scraped knees and quiet apologies. Clara learned that love didn't always ask permission. It sometimes simply stayed and waited for you to notice. There were hard years too. A sickness swept through the valley one winter. A drought tested the land another summer. Money ran thin more than once. Fear returned sometimes, uninvited in the middle of the night. But they faced it together. One evening, many years later, Jacob, nearly grown now, sat beside Eli on the porch as the sun dipped low. "You know," Jacob said, "I remember that night, not everything, but I remember you carrying us." Eli swallowed. "You were small. But I remember feeling safe," Jacob continued, "like no matter what happened next, it would be okay." Eli nodded slowly. "That's what I hoped." Jacob smiled. "You did good." Grace's laughter drifted from inside the house. Clara's voice followed, warm, steady, certain. The mountains stood as they always had. The land bore witness as it always would. Somewhere long ago, a little boy had whispered that his mama couldn't walk anymore. A cowboy had listened. And because he did, because he chose to carry instead of turning away, the story didn't end in the snow. It grew. It lived. And it kept going quietly, the way the best stories always do.